The last photograph of Madeleine McCann, smiling by the pool in Portugal, is the image that underpins the entire official story of her disappearance. It is the proof that Madeleine was there. But there's a problem with that photo. An analysis of the original file's metadata reveals that it was taken at 1:29 p.m. on May 3rd. However, the McCann's car rental receipt shows they only picked up the vehicle at the airport at 2:38 p.m. that same day. They couldn't have been at the resort to take that picture at that time. This technical detail, buried in the case files, is not just an inconsistency, it's a fracture in the timeline itself. It's the first piece of a terrifying puzzle that suggests the story of the disappearance in Portugal may be the biggest hoax ever constructed. The story we were told is almost a fairy tale in reverse. It begins in a paradise, Praia da Luz, Portugal, a holiday resort where danger seems like a distant fiction. At the heart of the story, we have the perfect characters, Kate and Gerry McCann, two successful, educated British doctors, the image of the ideal couple. And of course, the princess of the tale, Madeleine, a 3-year-old girl with unmistakable eyes, a face that would become one of the most recognized on the planet. The official narrative is simple, almost rehearsed. On the night of May 3rd, 2007, the doctor parents are dining with friends at a tapas restaurant, just 50 meters from the apartment where their 3 young children are sleeping. They feel safe. They've created a rotation system to check on the children, a decision that the entire world would later judge with the ferocity of a tribunal. At 10 o'clock at night, the fairy tale shatters. Kate McCann goes to check on her children and finds Madeleine's bed empty. The bedroom window open. Panic sets in. The frantic search begins, first with friends, then with resort staff, then with the police. Paradise transforms into a crime scene. The world watches, horrified. Millions are donated. Celebrities like David Beckham and J.K. Rowling appeal for help. Madeleine's face is everywhere. The story is clear. An innocent child was abducted from her bed by a monster who came through the window. A perfect family was destroyed by an unforeseeable tragedy. That's the story they sold us. The polished version, packaged for the media. The story that needed to be true for the world to continue making sense. That's the story that traveled the world. And speaking of the world, I'm curious, what time is it where you are watching? Leave a comment below. It's always fascinating to see how our community of investigators spreads across every corner of the planet, united in the search for truth, no matter the time zone. Now, let's get back to the case, because it is right there in the story everyone accepted that the biggest lie of all is hiding. But what if this whole story is a performance? What if the Portuguese paradise setting is just that, a set? What if the frantic search, the tears in front of the cameras, the emotional appeals, what if it's all part of a script, written to cover up a truth so terrible it defies our understanding of human nature? The thesis of this video is the most radical and disturbing of all. We believe that Madeleine McCann never disappeared in Portugal, for the simple reason that she never arrived in Portugal. This video will present the evidence suggesting that Madeleine died weeks or months earlier in the United Kingdom, and that the entire trip to Portugal was a macabre and elaborate charade planned by a group of people to create the illusion of an abduction and dispose of the body once and for all. To prove this, we need to do what no one has dared to do: treat the conspiracy theory with the seriousness of an investigation. And the investigation begins by questioning the fundamental piece of the entire narrative, the very presence of Madeleine McCann on Portuguese soil. If the theory that Madeleine never arrived in Portugal is true, then the entire disappearance event was not a tragedy, but a play. And like any good production, the set is crucial. The crime scene, apartment 5A, should have been irrefutable proof of an abduction. Instead, when we look closely, it seems like a poorly assembled stage, full of continuity errors that betray the performance. They said an abductor entered through the bedroom window, but the evidence shows a physical impossibility. The window, according to forensics, had no signs of forced entry. The external shutters were lifted, and the glass window was opened from the inside. The Portuguese police tried to recreate this entry and failed. For the story to work, we must believe in an abductor who is an Olympic-level acrobat, capable of contorting through a tiny gap to reach the latch, all without leaving a single fingerprint, a strand of hair, or a fiber of clothing. A forensic ghost. They said the abductor took the child and left. But through where? The front door was locked. The story then adjusts. He left through the back patio door, which was conveniently unlocked. But this door opened onto an area visible from the restaurant where the group was dining. If the goal was to create the story of an abduction, the open window and unlocked door are essential props. But as the root of a real crime, they defy logic. The crime scene doesn't look like it was violated by a stranger. It looks like it was arranged to appear as if it were violated. If the set is a stage, the statements are the script. And the script of the Tapas 7, the McCann's group of friends, is full of contradictory lines and unconvincing performances. Each testimony, when analyzed through the lens of a possible hoax, becomes less of an account and more of an act. Let's start with the phantom sighting. The group's friend, Jane Tanner, became the key witness by claiming to have seen a man carrying a child around 9:15 p.m. This statement was the pillar of the abduction theory for years. The problem? Years later, a British tourist proved that he was the man Jane Tanner saw, simply carrying his own daughter. The pillar of the abduction theory was smoke. From our theory's perspective, Jane Tanner's statement ceases to be a mistake and becomes something more sinister. Was it the first attempt to plant the seed of the abduction narrative in the minds of the police and the public? Then we have the dinner contradiction. The group claimed to have a check-in system every 30 minutes, but their own statements show a mess of timings. The crucial 9:30 p.m. check, which was supposed to be done by Matthew Oldfield, didn't actually happen. He only glanced in, he didn't confirm if Madeleine was there. This creates a gap of almost an hour, until Kate's alarm at 10 p.m. If it were all a performance, this confusion of times wouldn't be a mistake, but a deliberate strategy to create a nebulous and unchallengeable window of opportunity for the crime to occur. And finally, Kate's performance. Kate McCann's scream, "They've taken her," is the moment that ignites the whole drama. But according to the first to arrive on the scene, her behavior was strange. Instead of hysterical, uncontrolled panic, witnesses described an almost performative anguish, with her arms outstretched, screaming at the sky. If she were just discovering her daughter's death at that moment, the reaction would be one of shock, denial, an inward collapse. But if she were acting, playing the role of the mother who discovers the abduction, the reaction becomes more understandable. It's a performance for an audience. Their story simply doesn't add up. What do you think is the most glaring inconsistency so far? The testimony about the window or the confusing dinner timings? Leave your investigator's opinion in the comments below. The theories from this community often see what others ignore. When the stage is fragile and the script is flawed, the investigation turns to witnesses that cannot be rehearsed. Science. And in the McCann case, science arrived in the form of two sniffer dogs, Eddie and Keela. And what they found not only contradicts the abduction story, it annihilates it. Inside apartment 5A, weeks after the disappearance, Eddie, the dog trained to detect the scent of a cadaver, gave a positive alert in several locations. Behind the sofa. In the parents' bedroom. Keela, the blood dog, also alerted to traces of blood on the floor. Science was saying that there had been death and blood in that apartment. But the most devastating discovery, the one that becomes the nightmare of the abduction theory, came from the car the McCanns rented 25 days after Madeleine's disappearance. Inside the trunk of that Renault Scenic, Eddie alerted again unequivocally to the scent of a cadaver. Keela also found traces of blood. Subsequent analysis confirmed the presence of DNA compatible with Madeleine McCann's in the trunk. The official story has no way of explaining this. There is no scenario in which an abductor, weeks later, would place Madeleine's body in her parents' car. The only logical explanation is that Madeleine's body was in that car, and the only people with access to it were the McCanns. Now let's apply our radical theory. If Madeleine died in the UK, how did the scent of her corpse and her DNA end up in Portugal? The answer is as macabre as the theory itself. The body would have had to be transported, and the rented Renault Scenic wouldn't just be a holiday car. It would be the vehicle used for the final disposal. Science was screaming that a body had been there. In the room. In the car. A truth that cannot be ignored. The official abduction narrative doesn't explain how this is possible, but the theory that it was all a performance does. It transforms the dog's alerts from a mystery into a hoax, and the evidence points to a death that occurred much earlier. the question becomes even darker. How could a group of people plan and execute a deception of this magnitude? To answer that, we need to dive into the psychology of deceit and the logistics of a near-perfect crime. How could a group of people plan and execute a deception of this magnitude? The answer is that the deception didn't start in Portugal. It started much earlier, with a domestic tragedy that needed to be hidden at all costs. Forget what they said. The story probably happened like this. Weeks, maybe months before the trip, Madeleine dies. The cause is irrelevant to the hoax. It could have been an accident at home, a sudden illness, negligence. What matters is the panic that sets in. Kate and Jerry McCann, two respected doctors, face ruin. The loss of their daughter is overshadowed by the fear of losing everything they have built. Their careers, their status, their image of a perfect family. The decision is made in desperation. They will not report the death. They will hide it. The body is preserved, perhaps frozen, while an audacious plan is formed. They need a way to explain Madeleine's disappearance to the world, a way that casts them as victims, not suspects. They need a story. And the story will be an abduction in a foreign country. The holiday in Portugal, planned with a group of close and loyal friends, becomes the perfect stage. Each friend is given a role. They are no longer tourists. They are actors in a macabre production. The trip itself is the first scene. At the airport on the plane, the group must maintain the appearance of a happy family with 3 children. Perhaps the daughter of one of the friends, of a similar age and appearance, was used to create the illusion that Madeleine was present at key moments. Perhaps the twins, too young to understand, were the only real part of the family charade. Upon arriving in Portugal, the countdown begins. Madeleine's body, transported secretly, needs a final destination. Apartment 5A is not a holiday home. It's a temporary set. The night of May 3rd is opening night. The dinner at the tapas restaurant, the irregular checks, everything is choreographed to create the window of time for the crime. At 10 p.m., Kate performs her role. The scream, the panic, the alarm. The play begins. The police arrive at a crime scene that has already been prepared. The open window, the unlocked door. The friends' statements, rehearsed, introduce the figure of the abductor. The public relations machine, funded by donations, swings into action to control the global narrative. While the world searches for a living girl, the McCanns and their accomplices know they are just buying time to get rid of a body. The rental of the Renault Scenic 25 days later is not for sightseeing. It is the final stage of the operation, the final transport of Madeleine's body to an anonymous grave. What leads not just a couple, but an entire group of people to sustain such a monstrous lie? Psychology gives us a concept called folie à plusieurs, or madness of many. It's a rare phenomenon where a delusion is shared by a group of people in a close relationship. The dominant figure, in this case possibly Jerry McCann, creates the delusional narrative: we can control this, we can get away with it. And the others, out of loyalty, fear, or dependence, adopt this belief as their own reality. Maintaining a lie of this scale requires immense mental energy, what psychologists call cognitive load. This would explain the robotic, controlled and at times cold behavior of the McCanns and some of their friends. They weren't processing grief. They were managing an operation, constantly calculating their next steps, their next lines, terrified of making a mistake that could bring the whole house of cards down. The strangeness the world saw was not the strangeness of grief, but the unbearable tension of sustaining a hoax. So far, does this reconstruction of events seem more plausible than the story of a phantom abductor? Does the psychology of group deception better explain their actions than the pain of grief? Tell me in the comments if the pieces are starting to fit for you, because the evidence I'm about to show you is not a theory. It is the proof that seals this case, the definitive proof, the smoking gun that supports the theory that Madeleine was never in Portugal, is the total and absolute absence of her existence in that country, outside the closed circle of the McCanns and their friends. Think about it. A 3-year-old girl at a holiday resort for almost a week. She was not seen by a single resort employee independently. No waiter, no maid, no staff member at the Mark Warner Kids Club has a clear, verifiable record or memory of interacting with Madeleine McCann. The only witnesses to her presence are the McCanns themselves and the group of friends dining with them. The resort's kids club, where the twins, Sean and Amelie, were registered and seen by dozens of people, has no record of Madeleine. The McCanns claimed she didn't want to stay, but there isn't a single signature, a single form, a single employee who can say, yes, Madeleine McCann was here on this day, at this time. In a bustling resort, full of tourists and staff, a child is essentially a ghost for 5 days. She doesn't eat in a public restaurant, doesn't play in the common pool, doesn't participate in any activities. She only exists inside the apartment, or at moments when she is exclusively under the group's control. The only proof of her existence is the famous last photo by the pool. But as we've seen, the metadata of that photo contradicts the McCann's own movements that day. The photo, instead of being proof of life, becomes proof of the hoax. It's an anomaly that doesn't fit the timeline. The absence of evidence, when there should be an abundance of it, is in itself powerful evidence. Madeleine's total invisibility to anyone outside the inner circle doesn't prove she wasn't there, but it makes her presence extremely unlikely. It's the deafening silence where the noise of a child on holiday should be. And this silence is the piece that fits perfectly with the theory that the girl the world was looking for in Portugal had, in fact, never left the United Kingdom. With the proof on the table, the question changes. It's no longer what happened to Madeleine, but who helped hide the truth? The answer involves a conspiracy much larger than just a panicked couple. It involves the power of an entire state. If the theory that it was all a hoax is true, the most frightening question is not how the McCanns and their friends managed to deceive the local police. The question is how they managed to deceive the world. The answer is that they didn't do it alone. The truth, however inconvenient, was actively crushed by a system that, for political and diplomatic reasons, chose to participate in the charade. When the Portuguese police, led by Gonçalo Amaral, began to suspect the official story, the reaction from the British government was immediate and overwhelming. The then Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, and his ambassador to Portugal became directly involved in the case. The official narrative was that they were helping to find a missing British citizen. But their actions suggest another goal: to control the investigation and protect the McCanns at all costs. Because of the growing suspicions of the Portuguese police, the consequence was a brutal campaign by the British media to discredit the investigators, painting them as incompetent and xenophobic. Because of the sniffer dogs' alerts, the consequence was a war of experts, with British specialists questioning the validity of a science used in courts worldwide. Because of the McCanns' declaration as formal suspects, the consequence was the removal of Gonçalo Amaral from the case. The man who dared to question the play was thrown off the stage. The system did not want the truth. The truth, especially a truth as monstrous as an international hoax, was ugly, inconvenient. It would create an unprecedented diplomatic incident and tarnish the image of two nations. It was easier, cleaner, to embrace the fiction of the mysterious abductor. The investigation was shelved. The McCanns were cleared for lack of evidence, and the curtain fell on the Portuguese investigation. The lie won, but that victory came at a devastating human cost. The price of truth was paid by those who refused to applaud the play. Gonçalo Amaral, the detective who dared to follow the script of the evidence instead of the McCanns' script, had his career destroyed. He wrote a book, Maddie, The Truth of the Lie, detailing the inconsistencies he found. In response, the McCanns, with the support of a multi-million-pound fund, sued him, dragging him through a legal battle that lasted nearly a decade, trying to silence him and bankrupt him. He became the scapegoat, the villain of the story, punished for doing his job. People who lived in Praia da Luz and who dared to tell the police they didn't remember seeing the girl Madeleine were ignored. Their voices were drowned out by the noise of the global media campaign. The truth became radioactive. To touch it meant risking your reputation, your career, your peace. The system sent a clear message to everyone: stay silent. The show must go on. It's infuriating. It's frustrating. And that's why this channel exists. If you believe these stories of cover-ups need to be told, that the truth cannot be buried by power and money, then be part of this mission. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every subscription is a vote of confidence and a sign that we are not alone in this search. If the most radical theory is correct, the Madeleine McCann case is not the story of an unsolved crime. It is the story of a crime that was solved from the beginning, but whose solution was so terrible that the system preferred to create an eternal mystery rather than face it. Justice was never served, not for lack of clues, but because the very definition of crime was manipulated. The narrative of a German super-predator, Christian Bruckner, which emerged years later, fits perfectly into this theater. It's the final act, the introduction of a convenient villain to give the audience the closure it craves, without ever having to examine the truth about the main actors. The system won. Justice was buried. But in the midst of all this darkness, one final question remains, the most personal of all. What does this terrible story teach us about our own world? And what do we do with this inconvenient truth? What does this terrible story teach us about our own world? It teaches us that reality can be more fragile than we imagine. That truth can be rewritten by those with enough power and determination. And that sometimes, the biggest conspiracy is not hidden in the shadows, but performed under the spotlights, right before our eyes. My conviction at the end of this journey is that the most radical theory is also the most logical. I do not believe Madeleine McCann was abducted in Portugal. I believe the evidence points to a tragedy that occurred much earlier, and that what the world witnessed was the most audacious performance in modern criminal history. What haunts me is not the complexity of the plan, but its terrifying simplicity, using our own willingness to believe in a story of monsters to distract us from the ugly, desperate human truth that was right in front of us. The greatest injustice of all for me is that the world cried for an abduction that may have never happened, while the truth about a little girl's death was buried under the weight of a global lie. And now, after going through all this together, I need to know what this story has awakened in you. Use the comments below not to debate, but to bear witness. Witness your vertigo, your doubt, your outrage. Leave a word, a sentence, that shows we have not forgotten and we do not accept the silence. I will read every comment, because in a world that wants us silent, our collective voice is the only weapon we have. And this fight against silence doesn't end here. The same dynamics of power, secrets, and a reality that seems manipulated are repeated in an infamous case in the United States. In our next documentary, we will investigate how the wealth and influence of the Ramsey family may have buried the truth along with their 6-year-old daughter, JonBenet. To continue on this mission with me, subscribe and turn on notifications. The search for truth cannot stop. Until next time, remember, the truth doesn't need you to believe in it. It only needs you not to forget it.